Uganda's envoy to Burundi, Major General Matayo Kyaligonza, was thrust into the crosshairs last week after a clip caught on camera and circulated widely on social media showed his guards assaulting a traffic officer. Both police and the army attempted to placate public uproar by issuing statements and arresting Kyaligonza's guards.
We have created 2 task teams to pursue this matter, which include one headed by the KMP traffic commander. We'll investigate the conduct of the driver to the ambassador and under the charge of inconsiderate use of the road.
It was very improper for those 2 soldiers to conduct themselves the way they did, especially against a friendly force, a police sergeant on duty. It was absolutely wrong for those soldiers to conduct themselves the way they did.
My soldiers, I'm entitled for security. If I've got soldiers and tomorrow they sense a problem, then they jump out of their car. They go to ask a policewoman, what are you doing? Why are you stopping vehicles on the way? The Ginger Road cars were stopped. Those coming from Kampala were stopped. Then I tell this I'm watching it, let's go back. Now, all the time you have seen, even Museveni sometimes is moved on the wrong direction with his escort cars when he finds the traffic jam. Now, may I tell this for you, make a U-turn, let's go back. Now, the policeman, instead of stopping the other one coming so that I pass and we continue, he stops the vehicle. Now, the soldiers are expected to be annoyed.
But to some, it came as no surprise that Kyaligonza, a decorated bush war fighter, could not subdue his violent streak.
Don't touch me, no.
In his book, The Anatomy of Power, Kyaligonza says he first joined military service during former President Idi Amin's regime under the dreaded State Research Bureau until 1974, when he fled after the killing of his boss, Lieutenant Colonel Sarapio Kakuichire. The State Research Bureau employed the dregs of society, and their tools of trade were hammers, crowbars, pistols and guns, which they used to extract confession from their victims. Kyaligonza fled and joined Save Uganda movement under Kena Pajok that resisted Idi Amin, and later he joined President Museveni's Bush War struggle. Anthropological research shows that recovery from war is heavily influenced by the society one returns to, and there are societies that make the process relatively easy. For Kyaligonza, his formative years were heavily influenced by violence both under the tutelage of the State Research Bureau officers and later as an NRA guerrilla commander. During the Bush War, Kyaligonza operated in Mukono and led the Black Bombers, bands of ragtag rebels with urban terrorism skills.
That change has become meaningless. It's no longer change but merely turmoil. This group, getting rid of that group.
After the NRA captured power in 1986, he returned to fight insurgencies in Teso and Acholi sub-regions, which predisposed him to more violence. To Kyaligonza, power could only be exercised through the barrel of the gun, says Kira Municipality MP Ibrahim Semujunganda. Nganda says Kyaligonza's conduct and that of some Bush War generals is symptomatic of 2 main problems: the failure to retire them and subject all of them to a psychiatry evaluation, given the conditions they worked in.
Understand why Kyaligonza is behaving the way he's behaving. Ask yourself 2 questions. First of all, you had a group that left Ruwero having spent 5 years in the jungle. The first thing we should have done is to carry out a psychiatric test and then maybe make them undergo counseling and treatment. We didn't. There are those who adopted quickly, but their behavior in the bush, where there were no limitations, have continued with some of them who never received any counseling and psychiatric treatment.
Dr. Joshua Tugmisirize, a psychiatrist and neurophysiologist, says behavior is a mirror of society.
There are many reasons why people behave aggressively or use violence. as a culture, there are people who believe in achieving their wishes through use of violence. And if society tolerates them, they exploit that ability. Second, there are people who cannot help themselves. They are damaged either from trauma, injury, or from abuse of drugs and alcohol, or bad upbringing. So if we combine all of these together, we shall capture a lot of people in this country.
In relation to the several examples of impunity, either involving former bush war fighters or the military, Dr. Tugumisirize reinforced the notion of obligatory violence where it is used to serve a purpose.
You deliberately decide to use violence because it serves. Yes, you feed on violence because it serves your purpose. So if you talk about bush war, this was violence which was deliberate to serve.
Trouble seemed to trail Kyaligonza even after the NRA captured power. He was appointed a brigadier when the NRA gave official ranks in 1988. Kyaligonza was one rank short of Major General, the highest rank given to then President Museveni, Salim Saleh, Fred Rijema, and Eli Tumwine. A member of the High Command, he was later demoted to the rank of Colonel in 1989 after beating a traffic officer.
But he's a troubled man, I think, in a way, because first of all, there are people within the army who say he has only been promoted once. He's been demoted, then taken back to his former place. Then, because when the first rankings were issued in 1988, he was a brigadier. He went down a step, then came back to brigadier, and now he's Major General. So he's actually only made one step, and a few people might say he feels hard done by because of the impact, rather the things that he was doing in the bush war.
Without being an apologist, Kabuleta cited the example of American soldiers who were returning from the conflict in Vietnam and had to undertake counseling.
I'll give you an example. In America, who fought in Vietnam, who still have to be handled with care because of the level of the trauma that they went through in that place. Now, Vietnam was a lot earlier than the NRM bush war. So these are human beings, you see. We don't want to condone impunity, and now when it comes out as they can, as it famously did of, Jim Wes is saying that, when there's funds missing, and then he says you were eating sausages when we were fighting. Now that's different, and that's real impunity. Now I'm not so sure Kyaligonza's is impunity as much as it's a disorganized brain. He's a troubled man. That's the truth.
It is what some believe draws a conflicted personality, peppered with sometimes violence and starkly acts of kindness and benevolence.
Fighting for justice, as he did in fighting for justice an election in 2016, which was going to be won unfairly by former Deputy Premier Henry Muganwa Kajura, and he came and actually ensured that the will of the people was done. So there have been instances like that where he uses the same methods. He's not going to come and put people down and talk. He doesn't do it like that. He comes with the same Kyaligonza style, but sometimes for the benefit of, of the people. That's why in Hoima, there's not so much mixed reaction as much as, like, they tend to understand him. And he's fairly popular.
Masaka Municipality MP Matthias Impuga told NTV that Kyaligonza needs medical attention.
I did meet him in Burundi at the embassy doing parliamentary work. He had overrun the embassy and he had taken over powers of every officer. These are not signs of a person in his right senses. I think he needs help. And the actions of Sunday are not isolated. He has a record of violence.
Parliament, recall him as ambassador, and what is one big fuss. It's not going to happen. Because if you put Major General Matayo Kyaligonza under that sort of scrutiny, you're actually putting a whole system under trial. Because you see, people don't understand that it might be a generation who might just have to live, to live out, so to speak. Because When somebody fights in a guerrilla warfare, the first thing you lose is conscience, decorum, and all those things. You have to ask yourself, what were the things Kyaligonza was doing during the Bush War?
In the run-up to the 2001 general elections, the embattled ambassador beat up Amlan Tumsime, now turned NRM party mobilizer, who was then a news editor of Radio Hoima, for airing stories he said did not favor him.
From nowhere, just jumped up and said, "You mean you know the law? I also know the law, and I can break the law." So he grabbed me, hit me very hard on the wall. Then my face got swollen. He boxed me several times. He kicked me, and blood was oozing out of my nose, out of my mouth. The whole radio station went into panic, confusion.
In May last year, Major General Kyaligonza Matayo was also accused of beating up his neighbor after a disagreement over land boundaries.
Kwegamba akola ebintu bingi nnyo ebyafani situmanyi lwaki naye nga abapoliisi babagamba ye tavunaana ndowooza be beyita aba 7 historicals sibitegeera wabula ffe tukuba mulanga eri mu 7 yennyini ye kubanga buli lwogamba ogenda okuba poliisi bannanga onaakoze tyoyo mumuwabire wa mu 7 ffe tetumusobola.
In August last year, UPDF soldiers guarding the home of Major General Kyaligonza reportedly beat a resident in Chukoma in Wakiso district following a disagreement at a construction site. The several accounts of assault under his name notwithstanding, some people from his backyard say he's quite generous. He has constructed a church and supports sports activities.
He is human and he deserves to be cancelled and forgiven. Because I only know 2 people in the whole of Bunyoro who have spent their money to train priests. Abafuaza, these church leaders. I don't know how many Kyaligonza has taken to those seminaries using his own money.
If the society decides that those who give charity are absolved of their crime, then that's the way society will operate.
It is 33 years since Matayo Kyaligonza left the bush struggle. But beyond the camaraderie with his comrades forged on violence, fear, risk, and finally triumph, he returned to a dysfunctional society that often glorifies violence.